The sphere spinning out in space. My name is Henrik Palmgren. Thank you for taking the time to listen in these strange and interesting times as we're trying to detail and figure out some of the mysteries of this world and beyond. Sunday, the 3rd of April of this year, 2011, there is a conference in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, on the theme of the secret space program. Richard Hoagland, Peter Levenda, Richard Doland, and Timothy Good will be speaking, and we're going to be there as well. It's a little bit more than a month to go now, and it's a good time to start getting those tickets if you're interested in attending this conference. If you want to look at all the details, you can find more information on the website secretspaceprogram.com. And when you buy tickets, you also get a free month subscription to Red Ice. This is in Amsterdam in the Netherlands going into the springtime, so I think it's going to be a lot of fun, so we hope to see you there. secretspaceprogram.com. And if you want to get a teaser on what this is all about, we have one of the speakers with us today on the program, Timothy Good, author of the bestseller Above Top Secret, the Worldwide UFO Cover-Up. Also Beyond Top Secret, and his latest is called Need to Know, UFOs, the Military and Intelligence. And this is just mentioning a few of his titles, a few of his books. Timothy joins us from the UK to discuss UFOs, extraterrestrial contact, abductions, the hybridization program, colonization, warfare, and much, much more. Welcome, Timothy Good. It's great to have you with us on Red Ice Radio. We really appreciate you taking the time. I think that this is going to be an interesting show. Welcome, Timothy.
Thank you very much, Henrik.
Excellent. I know that your interest in the UFO phenomena began in 1955 when you were about 13, and I know that your American cousin gave you a copy, I think, of Donald Keyhoe's book, Flying Saucers Are Real. Since that time, you've been researching, continued the work, and you've written about 11 books now on the subject. So
correct.
There is a tremendous amount of material to discuss, obviously, and we obviously won't have time to talk about it all here on these 2 hours that we have with you today. But maybe you can paint a picture for us on what you have found basically during your years of study, how you view the phenomena, and then we can get into some more details about certain aspects of all this. But paint a little picture for us, if you will, Timothy.
Sure. Well, my interest, as you say, was stimulated by a cousin in the States. This was a guy called Edmund C. Berkeley, who in fact started, I believe, the world's first magazine on computers way back in the 1940s, when nobody knew anything at all about computers except those working in the intelligence community, for example. But he was a real pioneer, and he knew of my passion for aviation and space travel, which I've had since I was a very young child. And he said to me when he was on one of his trips to the United Kingdom from the States, he said, "Timothy, do you know anything about flying saucers?" And I said, "No. What's all that about?" And he said, "Well, people have been reporting these things for quite a while now, especially pilots." And he gave me this book, The Flying Saucers Are Real, by Major Donald Keyhoe, which you mentioned earlier. And I was immediately impressed because here were reliable reports from professionals, people who know what should be in the sky. Airline pilots, military pilots, sightings of objects sometimes in very close proximity to their aircraft, to their military planes and to commercial planes, often affecting all sorts of systems on those aircraft. And these events invariably, not always, but invariably were picked up, of course, on radar. And so we have confirmation from air traffic controllers that this is something real, that they register a very solid echo on radar screens. And obviously this means that we're dealing with something which is solid and quite real, apparently. And that's what got me hooked, because I knew quite a lot about aviation, even when I was a youngster, and this convinced me that there had to be something to the phenomenon. And then I started to read another book. In 1961, I decided to take this subject seriously. In 1961, I read a book called, I think it was just the Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by Captain Edward Ruppelt, who was one of the chiefs of the American Project Bluebook investigation, which lasted many years. And he was an intelligence officer. He'd served in the military himself, and of course he spoke to numerous pilots all throughout the United States, and scientists and Pentagon people who confirmed that this was all very real and very alarming. And his book really is quite extraordinary, bearing in mind that he laid his reputation online, and he suffered for it as a consequence, because he was saying this is all very real and it's disturbing, and we need to know what's going on. So that's how I got started.
And we have a lot of things obviously that have happened since that point. What do you consider to be reliable information about the subjects? Are we primarily talking about what comes from the world of officialdom in terms of military or government, or how do you view, I guess, personal accounts and things like that as well?
Yes. Well, obviously, I place a high value on reports from military and civilian pilots, and I know many, and I've written about many of these reports from people, in many cases, who've become friends of mine, and they, again, are laying their reputations online, because there's a lot of ridicule associated with this subject. I would say professionally encouraged ridicule to make the general public think that this is all a lot of nonsense, and that goes on to this day, and you see constantly in the major media sources. For example, the Times in our country, in the UK, is probably the most vociferous in debunking the subject, even if in their own paper sometimes they have very sensible articles by some of their reporters on events reported by pilots and other people from other walks of life. But the sort of editorial policy is to say it's entirely in the mind. Flying saucers exist in the imagination only. There is no objective reality to them. And that was stated in the Times only in the last few months. So, you know, it's extraordinary how this subject continues to be debunked, particularly in the view of witnesses who have very high credibility. I mean, to go on from pilots, both commercial and military, there are people in navies all over the world, in our Royal Navy, United States Navy, Swedish, Norwegian Navy, I'm quite sure, who have had encounters with not just unidentified flying objects, but unidentified submergible objects, because these things don't just go in the air, they're frequently seen coming out of the sea at high speed and diving into the sea. And there's lots of credible reports. And just as these things register on radar, they also register on sonar as very solid objects. So there's that. And then there are just people from all walks of life, men and women, members of the general public, who have encountered these things by the million over the decades since these things started to increase. I would say certainly back in the late 1930s, throughout World War II, right to the present day, there has been an enormous number, millions of sightings, of which, even if we dismiss 90%, 10% of millions comes to quite a few reports from men and women from all walks of life, qualified people from all countries who have seen these things and who have had actual communications with them, because the next step, I think, beyond just the sightings is obviously if people have close-up encounters with these things,
right.
And that has happened many times. And of course, to take it one step beyond that, has there been any communication? And that is another special area of my expertise, or professed expertise, I should say. I don't want to boast about it, but I have always been interested in the encounters reported by men and women from all walks of life, some of them highly qualified, others just very ordinary citizens who have had communications with extraterrestrials. Mm-hmm. That is throughout the world. Some countries more than others, that's for sure.
That's right. Well, we can definitely discuss some of these individuals, and I know that certain individuals you've also looked closer at, obviously, in your books as well. So that's something we can get into later. But where do you feel that the UFO subject connect with the abduction phenomena? Because if we look at it on paper, of course, they're two different subjects, obviously, and one doesn't have to prove the other or what have you. The UFO subject is still the idea. Yes. There is that it's just unknown flying objects, basically, which could be whatever. But when we look at it from the point of view of the abduction phenomena, it gets a little bit more specific, if I put it that way.
Yes, I think one of the first stories to come out was that of Antonio Villas Boas. He was a farmer who one night was on his farm, on a tractor on his farm, when a flying saucer landed, complete with small humanoid occupants who dragged him onto their spacecraft, and he struggled, but he couldn't get away. They were very, very strong. And he was presented to a naked female humanoid, and he had sexual intercourse with her. At least once, I gather, over a certain period of time, and she pointed to her stomach and then pointed to the sky. And it was obviously made clear that the child would be born. I think that was the idea of the object of the exercise. A child was to be produced, a hybrid, if you like, a cross between these alien humanoids and this farmer. And he was eventually taken on a tour of this craft, and they didn't treat him unpleasantly. They were quite rough with him at first because they had to drag him onto this craft before presenting him to this female. Anyway, he was eventually released, and he was examined by two doctors, and his case was studied very, very thoroughly by the Brazilian government. And two doctors, one of whom was a friend of mine, examined him and was absolutely convinced that he had received some type of radiation emanating from this craft, because he was suffering from certain ailments. Mm-hmm. And as far as he was concerned, this doctor was concerned, this man was absolutely genuine. Now, Antonio Villas Boas later became a well-known lawyer. I'm not sure if he's still alive, but a very respectable lawyer in Brazil. And he was also taken to the United States, or he was given the money, he was sent the money by the CIA to bring him to Washington, and he was interrogated over a period of quite a number of days by the Central Intelligence Agency, because they treated him very well. There are a number of other cases I'm familiar with where...
Well, you were just telling me basically that CIA took him to Washington, questioned him. Maybe you can take it from that point.
Yes, I don't know all the details, I'm afraid, but I know of another person who was taken on board craft, who I wrote about in my book Unearthly Disclosure, and he was I'm just trying to recall details of his case, but I wrote about him, and I found him a most convincing, a very, very convincing guy, and he was basically, I think, from Costa Rica when he had his first encounter in 1963.